Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're jumping onto the ice, looking into the really intense world of ice hockey and some of those unseen forces, specifically how impacts affect players' brains.
Yeah, it's a huge topic and honestly, often misunderstood. We hear about concussions, right?
Yeah.
And ice hockey has one of the highest rates. We know that.
Hmm.
But it's more than just those big obvious hits. It's the repeated subconcussive impacts too, the ones that don't necessarily cause immediate symptoms.
Right, the ones that add up over time.
Exactly. And those are being linked to some really serious long-term problems, things like depression, executive dysfunction.
Which affects things like focus and planning.
Precisely. Planning, decision-making, that sort of thing. And also general cognitive impairment down the line.
So that cumulative effect is key. Okay, so today's deep dive, we're cutting through some of the noise, right? We're looking at new research to get you the core insights.
Yeah, focusing on how, when, and where head impacts are actually happening in men's university hockey. And crucially, what makes a particular impact severe.
Okay, so what's our main source for this?
We're primarily diving into a study, an observational cohort study published just last October. It's by Olivia M.G. Aguiar and colleagues out of Simon Fraser University.
Sam Fraser, okay. And what makes this study stand out?
Well, it's the methodology, really. They combined helmet-mounted sensors with really comprehensive video analysis, multiple angles, the whole ice.
Ah, okay. Because I know some previous research maybe relied just on sensors, right? Which could sometimes overestimate impacts.
That's exactly it. Or they didn't have that detailed situational context from the video. This study, though, used a 5-camera system covering the entire rink.
Wow, 5 cameras.
Yeah, and they rigorously video verified every single potential impact picked up by the sensors, so it gives a much clearer, more nuanced picture.
Filling in some important gaps then
Yeah.
for things like gear, maybe rink design, even rules.
Definitely. Protective gear, how rinks are built, player training, rule changes, it touches on all of that.
All right, let's get into how they did it. You mentioned Simon Fraser University players.
Yeah, 46 male university players, 33 forwards, 13 defensemen. And they followed them over 3 seasons, from 2016 up to 2019.
3 seasons. Okay, decent time frame. And the tech, those helmet sensors.
Right, they use G-force tracker sensors. These things measure peak linear acceleration, that's the straight line force, measured in Gs, and peak rotational velocity in radians per second.
And that rotational velocity, the twisting force, that's really important for brain injury risks, isn't it?
It's considered a key factor, yeah, often more damaging than just the linear hit.
Okay, sensors measuring force and then the video. 5 cameras, you said.
5 cameras positioned all around the rink, so they could capture the entire ice surface and verify every impact visually.
Got it. And how many impacts did they end up analyzing?
They captured and verified a total of 234 head impacts that met their criteria.
And what was the criteria for an impact?
It had to be visible contact direct to the player's head from, another player or an object, and it had to register at least 10 gram of linear acceleration on the sensor.
10 gram minimum. Okay. So with all that data, what did they find? Where are these hits happening?
Well, location-wise, the vast majority, 77%, happened along the perimeter of the rink, so near the boards, in the corners.
Okay, that makes some sense. Lots of action there. What about playing zones?
More impacts in the offensive zone, 55% compared to the defensive zone, which was 32%. The rest in the neutral zone.
And puck possession. Does having the puck make a difference?
This was pretty striking. A huge 87.2% of head impacts happened when the player did not have the puck.
Wow, 87%. So you're much more likely to get hit when you don't have it.
About 6.8 times more likely, according to their data.
Okay. And anticipation. Were players seeing these hits coming?
In about 60% of cases, the player was actually looking in the direction of the collision.
Huh. Okay, so perimeter hits, often without the puck, often in the offensive zone. You'd think maybe these factors would influence how severe the impact is, right?
You would think so. But here's one of the really big surprises of the study. They found no significant differences in head impact severity, either linear acceleration or rotational velocity, based on any of those things.
Wait, really? No difference based on zone?
Nope. Offensive, defensive, neutral didn't matter for severity.
Perimeter versus open ice.
No difference there either.
Having the puck or not.
Didn't affect the severity of the impact itself.
Even looking towards the hit.
Even that, no significant difference in the measured severity.
Okay, that's actually pretty counterintuitive. So While those factors clearly affect how often you get hit, they don't seem to predict how bad the hit will be when it happens.
Exactly. The frequency changes, but the severity measured by these forces seems independent of those common circumstances.
All right, let's shift gears slightly.
Hmm.
What about what is actually hitting the player's head and where on the head?
Okay, so about 60% of the impacts came from another player's body part. The other 40% were environmental, hitting the glass, the boards, maybe the ice.
And within those player-on-player hits.
Impacts from a shoulder, upper arm, or a hand were more than twice as common as hits from an elbow or forearm.
Okay, and the environmental hits. Glass versus boards.
Head-to-glass impacts were way more common, about 3.7 times more common than hitting the boards.
Interesting. Maybe something about the dynamics near the glass. And where on the head did impacts usually land?
The side of the head was the most common location, 62% of impacts. Then the front was 21%, back 12%, and top just 5%.
Side of the head. Okay. And here's a detail you mentioned earlier that seems important. Was the head usually the first thing hit?
Rarely, actually. In player-on-player collisions, the head was the initial point of contact in only 24% of cases.
Only a quarter. So most of the time it's a secondary impact to the head.
Correct. The initial contact is elsewhere, and then the head gets hit as part of the follow-through or reaction.
Okay, so different objects hitting, different locations on the head, primary versus secondary contact. Surely these things must affect severity.
This is where it gets even more interesting, or maybe confusing, depending on how you look at it. The study found no differences in head impact severity based on any of that either.
Seriously. So getting hit by a shoulder wasn't measurably worse than hitting the glass, for example.
According to their sensor data, no significant difference based on the specific object's shoulder, hand, elbow, glass, board, even a stick.
Wow. That really goes against some common assumptions, maybe even some lab findings, right?
It does challenge some prior thinking, and same thing for location on the head side, front, back, top, no difference in severity.
And even whether the head was hit first or second.
Even that didn't significantly change the measured linear acceleration or rotational velocity.
Okay, so a hit to the side of the head from a shoulder, even if it's secondary contact, could register the same forces as, say, going headfirst into the glass.
Based on this data, yes.
Right.
The severity seems detached from those specific impact characteristics.
That really forces us to rethink what makes an impact dangerous then. If it's not the location or the object or having the puck,
Yeah.
what does correlate with severity?
Right. So the researchers looked at two other things, visible signs of injury or concussion and whether a penalty was called.
Okay, let's start with visible signs. Did they see players showing signs of being hurt?
Yes. In 11% of the impacts, that was 25 out of the 134 total impacts. The most common signs were the player being slow to get up, which happened 21 times, and clutching of the head, which they saw 5 times.
Okay, 11%. And did those impacts register differently on the sensors?
Yes, they did. Here's a really key finding. The mean peak rotational velocity was 1.3 times greater, so about 30% higher when the player showed those visible signs.
Higher rotational velocity specifically.
Yes. Interestingly, there was no significant difference in the linear acceleration, just the rotational.
Okay, that's fascinating. What does that imply?
Well, it strongly suggests that when you see a player slow to get up or grabbing their head, they likely experienced a genuinely more severe impact in terms of that damaging rotational force. It kind of pushes back against that cynical idea you sometimes hear that players might be, exaggerating signs for a penalty or a stoppage.
Right. It links the visible sign to a measurable increase in a key injury risk factor.
Exactly. And it supports the protocol that any player showing those signs really needs to be removed and checked out properly, regardless of whether those signs perfectly predict a formal concussion diagnosis later. The impact itself was demonstrably more severe rotationally.
Makes sense. Okay, what about the penalties? How often were these head impacts actually penalized?
Not very often. Penalties were called in only 8% of the head impacts that involved player-on-player contact.
Only 8%. Why?
And get this, remember how we said the head was the initial point of contact in only 24% of player-on-player hits?
Yeah.
Well, of those direct primary head contact cases, only 4% actually resulted in a penalty.
4%. For direct head contact, that seems incredibly low.
It's a shocking statistic, yeah. And it points to a potential issue with enforcement or perhaps the rules themselves.
Did the penalized hits show different severity levels?
Yes, but specifically for major penalties, the ones longer than 2 minutes. For those major infractions, the mean peak rotational velocity was 2.0 times higher, literally double compared to impacts that weren't penalized.
Double the rotational velocity for major penalties. What about minor penalties?
No significant difference in severity for the minor penalties compared to non-penalized impacts.
Okay, so putting this all together, it sounds like the rules focusing on targeting the head might be missing a lot of the picture.
It seems that way. While penalizing direct head contact is obviously important, this study suggests it's happening rarely, enforced inconsistently maybe, and most impacts aren't direct primary contact anyway.
And severity isn't necessarily linked to that primary contact.
Right, so just focusing on primary head contact rules might be a limited solution. We probably need strategies that reduce both primary and secondary head impacts.
Okay, so let's recap the big takeaways for everyone listening. It seems, surprisingly, that head impact severity in this study wasn't really connected to the usual suspects playing zone, having the puck, what hit the head, or even where on the head.
Correct. Those things influence how often hits happen, but not necessarily how bad they are force-wise. The real indicators of higher severity, particularly that dangerous rotational velocity, were whether the player showed visible signs like being slow to get up and whether a major penalty was called.
And those major penalties, especially for direct head hits, are rare, which highlights a gap in enforcement or maybe even the rules themselves.
Definitely. It raises a big question. We know rotational velocity is bad for the brain, and we see it's higher with visible signs and major penalties. So how do we actually improve things, the rules, the enforcement, to reduce those specific, more severe impacts?
Yeah, it's a tough question, and it leads to a final thought for you, the listener, to consider. If this study shows players with visible signs are experiencing worse rotational impacts, and most head hits aren't penalized anyway,
What does that mean for everything else? How we train players, maybe awareness, body positioning, how we design rinks, should the glass and boards be different, less rigid perhaps, and equipment, how do we better protect against rotational forces, not just linear ones?
it seems we need to think beyond just rules about targeting the head. So, reflecting on all this, what stands out most to you as the most pressing area for improving ice hockey safety right now? Something to think about.